The deep ocean was never empty. Humanity had known this, in an abstract, philosophical way, for centuries. We had named the layers of the sea, the sunlit zone, the twilight zone, the midnight zone, the abyssal plain, as if labeling them was the same as understanding them. We had sent down remotely operated vehicles bristling with cameras and sonar arrays and come back with footage of things that looked like nightmares given physical form. Transparent creatures the size of buses, bioluminescent forests of impossible geometry, creatures that hunted in total darkness using senses we could barely theorize. We had documented perhaps 5% of the ocean floor. We called the rest unexplored. We should have called it occupied. First contact did not happen in space. The message didn't come through radio telescopes pointed at distant stars. It didn't arrive in a burst of gamma radiation from some extrasolar source, decoded by linguists and physicists working in government bunkers. It came from below. It came from 4,200 meters beneath the surface of the South Pacific, pinging upward through the water column in a frequency we had never used and had never monitored, because we hadn't thought anything down there would have anything to say. The signal was detected by accident. A deep-sea monitoring buoy maintained by NOAA, one of thousands deployed worldwide to track seismic activity and water temperature, caught the frequency spike on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The automated systems flagged it as instrument error. A junior analyst named Priya Vasanthan noticed it while doing routine data review, thought it was strange, and filed a low-priority report. That report sat in a queue for 11 days before anyone looked at it. When they looked at it, everything changed. The signal wasn't noise. It was structured. Mathematically structured in a way that screamed intelligence to anyone who understood signal theory. It was a sequence, prime numbers, first. Then geometric ratios. Then something more complex, layered harmonic patterns that our best analysts spent 6 weeks trying to interpret before they realized it wasn't a language at all. It was an invitation. Commander Yolanda Serrano had spent 22 years in the United States Navy, the last 8 of them commanding deep-sea research operations under the Naval Oceanographic Office. She was not a woman who was easily impressed by the unusual. She had dived in nuclear submarines, spent time at research stations on the mid-Atlantic ridge, and once watched a sperm whale fight a giant squid at close range from a pressure hull viewport. She had a particular talent for staying calm in the presence of the inexplicable. So when her office received orders to lead the first coordinated response to the signal, now officially classified as the Vasanthan anomaly by NOAA and the UN Joint Response Committee, she did not panic. She did not weep with existential terror. She made a list of the things she didn't know, and she began to find out. What she found out over the course of 4 months of classified research conducted under the cover of a routine oceanographic survey was this: the signal was coming from a structure. Not a geological formation. A structure, built with deliberate architecture, with angles and symmetry that don't occur in nature, sitting in the abyssal plain of the South Pacific as if it had been there for 10,000 years. Sonar mapping revealed it to be roughly 2 kilometers in diameter and perhaps 400 meters tall, shaped like a flattened dome with irregular protrusions that the analysts nicknamed spires. The outer surface absorbed sonar pings in a way that suggested metamaterial engineering of staggering sophistication. In other words, something had been built down there by something that understood physics well enough to make its home nearly invisible to our most advanced detection methods. And it had chosen to stop being invisible. The question was, the first drone they sent down didn't come back. The second one did, but its camera feeds were scrambled, its sonar array was wiped, and its hull had been politely but unmistakably reshaped around the propulsion unit, rendering it inoperable. It floated to the surface like a folded piece of origami. The message was clear: passive observation is not welcome. The third drone carried no sensors at all. It was little more than a hull, a propulsion system, and a speaker array broadcasting the same harmonic sequence the signal had given them, played back in careful mimicry. They lowered it on a cable. It descended 4 kilometers in the dark. And something came up. They called the first emissary Echo, because it spoke by repeating things back at you, subtly altered, as if language for them was not a system of symbols but a process of transformation. You said something, they changed it, The change was the meaning. It took 8 months before Dr. Amara Osei, a linguist from the University of Ghana who had spent her career studying tonal languages, developed the first working framework for communication. It took another 4 before they could hold anything resembling a sustained conversation. What they learned in those conversations reordered human history. The beings, they called themselves something that translated roughly as the deep architects, though Dr. Osei noted the translation was clumsy and probably wrong, had been here before us. Not on the land. They had never cared about the land. But the ocean had been theirs for longer than anatomically modern humans had existed. Millions of years longer. They had watched the continents drift. They had watched the great extinctions come and go. They had watched the ice sheets grow and recede. And they had watched us, the strange, loud, short-lived creatures on the surface, slowly develop the ability to reach down into their world. For a long time they had let it go. We were a curiosity. Our sonar was annoying. Echo communicated this with particular emphasis, repeating Serrano's own words back to her with an undulation she had learned to associate with displeasure, but it was survivable. Our deep-sea drilling was more serious. Our waste disposal in the ocean's depths was approaching what Echo called, in the translated framework Dr. Osei had built, threshold of recourse. The signal had been a warning. A gentle one. The last gentle one they intended to offer. The political response was, predictably, a catastrophe. Half of the UN Security Council wanted to classify the information and develop a military response. The other half wanted to immediately broadcast the discovery publicly and begin formal diplomatic proceedings. A third faction, technically a minority, but vocal, was convinced the whole thing was an elaborate hoax and demanded independent verification. 3 governments quietly began investigating the feasibility of deep penetration munitions capable of reaching the structure. Commander Serrano watched all of this from her post aboard the research vessel Vanguard, anchored 2 kilometers above the structure, and she thought about a conversation she'd had with Echo 6 weeks earlier. She had asked, carefully, using the transformed harmonic language Dr. Osei had spent her career building, whether the deep architects were alone. Whether there were others like them, elsewhere in the ocean. Echo had been quiet for a long time. Then it had given her an answer that she hadn't included in her official report, because she didn't think the UN Security Council would respond to it well. There are those among us, Echo had said, in the rippling, recursive language of transformation, who argued against the signal. Who said you were not ready. Who said the only language your kind understands is consequence. We overruled them. We sent the invitation instead. We will not overrule them again. It was Serrano who made the call. Not the Security Council. Not the Secretary General. Not the admirals and generals who were, at that moment, sitting in rooms arguing about missile yields. She made the call because she understood something none of them seemed to. The deep architects had not revealed themselves because they needed to. They had survived for millions of years without our knowledge. They had watched our sonar pulses ping off their metamaterial walls for decades and said nothing. They were not weak. They were not afraid. They had come to the table because they chose to, and they could leave the table, and take the table with them, the moment they decided the conversation wasn't worth having. She drafted a message. Dr. Osei translated it. A technician encoded it in the harmonic sequence. They broadcast it downward through 4 kilometers of cold, dark water. It was not an apology. Serrano was a Navy commander. She didn't apologize for things she couldn't change. It was a commitment. We hear your threshold, the message said. We cannot speak for every nation or every fleet. We cannot guarantee the silence of every sonar array or the end of every drill. But I am speaking to you now as one who has looked into the deep and understood that what lives there is not less than us. It is older and wiser and has chosen patience over power. Tell us what silence looks like. Tell us what the threshold demands. We will carry the answer back to those who have the authority to make it real, and we will spend whatever remains of our time in this position making the argument that it is worth making. We would like to keep talking. There was a long silence, 4 hours, during which Serrano sat in the communications bay and drank bad coffee and thought about her career and her children and the strange, enormous fact of living in the moment when humanity discovered it was not alone. Then Echo's response came up through the water. Dr. Osei translated it in a voice that was not quite steady. Then we will keep talking. The story does not end there. Stories like this one never end cleanly. It took 3 years to get the Abyssal Accord ratified by enough nations to matter. It took another 5 to actually implement the sonar reduction protocols and the deep-sea drilling moratorium in the most sensitive zones. There were incidents. A Russian submarine that crossed into restricted waters and was returned to the surface, hull intact but every electronic system burned out, with no crew injuries and no explanation that any engineer could verify. A deep-sea mining company that sent drones into the exclusion zone and never got them back. A rogue state that tested a deep penetration munition in the Pacific and found, the following morning, that every piece of oceanographic infrastructure it owned had silently ceased to function overnight. The deep architects were very old, and very patient, and very precise. They never killed anyone. They never had to. They simply made the cost of non-compliance exactly as high as it needed to be and not 1 degree higher. In the classified archives of the Naval Oceanographic Office, there is a note in Commander Serrano's handwriting, added to the file 7 years after first contact. It reads, "They used sonar to find us, by which I mean we used sonar to find them and they let us when they were ready. Every ping we sent for 50 years was them learning our vocabulary before they decided to say hello. And we used silence to end them, by which I mean we nearly did, with our noise and our drilling and our arrogance, before someone thought to listen. The deep is not empty. It never was. Learn to be quiet, and maybe it will let you stay."